Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Tell No Lies podcast. I'm your host, Devin Physique, sitting alongside my lovely best friend and my mother, Liz Webster.
Hey.
Back for episode 2 today. You know, it's kind of crazy. So we came out with episode 1, and, obviously we've had a great standing relationship for so many years. And, going back to the early stages of social media, people always knew the connection that we had. And so when we put out the video, it was kind of alarming to remind ourselves, like, we obviously lived in the moment that we weren't talking and that we had the estranged 3 years. But I got a ton of messages from random people that were saying, like, oh my God, I'm so shocked by the news. I had no idea that your mom wasn't in your life. So it just reminded me how many people were engaged and how close we were throughout the years with the social media, the shreds days, all that. And then how many people just, didn't see me post about you. So they, most people don't go estranged from their parents. So they just assumed that everything was fine. So, to see, us kind of briefly talk about that and it remind people like, oh, not only did he get close with his family again, but he wasn't even talking to them to begin with, which was kind of crazy. So we're just going to dive right into it, kind of go back and relive those steps, kind of what we learned through the process. And, I know you touched base on it a little bit last episode about, you getting closer to God in that time. And I was obviously drifting into a darker place at that time, not necessarily knowing that, but essentially that's kind of what it led into. So I'll kind of let you, jump into, your perspective, and we'll kind of just piggyback off each other.
Okay, yeah. As we were talking, I was sharing how interesting the timeline was of where you were going and where I was going. And, for me personally, I was going through a lot of things that caused me to just surrender to God and say, I'm done trying to do life my way and I'm letting you. And I completely devoted my life the next 3 years fully into God, just learning as much as I could about him, getting closer to him, praying, going to church, all of us going to church. And in that time frame, you were actually doing the opposite and you were going further away from us. I saw you further in what I called, he's in a dark place right now. And when we talked, you had said, I don't feel like it was a dark place for me because I was finally free and I was finally doing what I wanted to do. I didn't feel the pressure. I didn't feel, whatever, you were sad. And so you just went right into saying that. And I paused and I stopped you and I said, actually, Devin, it's how we think, we're actually okay with going into that place. We're not happy. That's not where we want to go. But it's like, that's what we tell ourselves because the pressure's off of what was feeling down. And that's exactly what the enemy wants you to do, is just keep playing that in your head that it's like, no, this is a good place. This is where I want to be. There's no pressure. I'm happy. And so as you were believing that, you were going further away from us. And, and then myself, I was just getting closer to God. So it was interesting how we talked about that time frame of, going in opposite directions. And that's exactly where the enemy wanted you. And then God wanted me right where I was, completely letting him do everything. And he was working it out. And so in that time, I felt, like I told you, so much peace knowing that you were okay. And I just prayed for you like every single day. And then we started talking about how when it started, and, it was, you were already feeling the pressure. You weren't happy with what you were doing. And I was trying to tell you, like, you don't have time for that. You got to keep doing what you're doing. Mm-hmm. Why are you doing these dumb videos? And I remember just being so irritated. And you were like, I'm enjoying them. This is fun. And I'm like, you don't have time for fun. You got to, do work.
Yeah, fun's not making you money.
Yes. And you remember that. And so I remember you just feeling more pressure and you're like, fine, whatever. I'll just do whatever you want. And so then the next time I think we saw each other was at Logan's birthday party.
Which, to give context, that's my sister's daughter.
Yeah. And I just asked you 2 simple questions and they were no pressure. It was, just, I think it was like, what's going on with work and some other question. And you just completely not snapped where you got angry. You just got irritated. You didn't want to talk about it. You're like, you know what? I'm done. I'm out of here. I'm leaving. And I was just like, what in the world did I say? And I remember you had 3 hours before your flight to go back home and you were going to leave. And I told Nikki, I'll just leave. and he can, enjoy 3 hours with you. And so I ended up leaving, and that's literally the last time that we saw each other.
And real quick, I think that in that time period, like as we've talked about it, prior to getting on here and stuff like that, I think that I already felt so much pressure. I've talked about this openly where I said in those time periods, I felt like I needed my mother and I had a business partner that was instilling in me, like, the things that you enjoy don't matter right now. You need to focus on the money. So I think just constantly hearing that, I just got to a point where that was enough to make me want to separate from you. Yeah. It was like I was looking for something finally to just give me a reason to cut you off.
Right. And I know now, looking back, like, I should have asked you, what did you need? And it's interesting because I read one time on suicide that most of the time when people are suicidal, they talk about it, and people will say, how could you think about doing something like that? How dare you want to, do that to yourself? And that's the worst thing you could do, is you need to ask them, like, what can I do for you? What do you need from me? And I think if I had done that, you kind of would have probably opened up and shared how you were feeling. And I could have walked you and helped you through that. But I didn't want to hear that, because I just knew what you were good at, and I knew that's who you were. And I just wanted you to continue in that. And I think, we talked about how I felt like you were just exhausted from everything that you had gone through in your past with, Instagram stuff. And, we were going to talk about that later. But I think that pressure that you felt from that, it just got exhausting. And so you were looking for just something that was going to be
like new and fresh.
Yeah. And just make you, like you said, happy. So, but I didn't want to hear that at the time. So yeah, we weren't talking. And in that, I just knew that I wanted to make sure you knew that I was not mad at you, that the door was always open to talk to me, and that I loved you. And so I would send you text messages in these last 3 years. I mean, I would scroll and show people, how many text messages you saw, and you just didn't ever respond. And, it was okay. Like, I wasn't hurt. I wasn't mad at you. There was peace, and I'll never be able to really describe it to people, but I know it was that God gave that to me, that he gave me that incredible gift to just be so at peace, with it all. And I knew you were coming home, but it's interesting to just look back and go, dang, I ignored every single message that I sent. And, we were going to talk about one, and I always ask you permission if it's something that I can talk about. And I said, there was one time that you responded. It was me saying something a day before Mother's Day, I think. And I was like, it's not going to be the same without you. You're going to be missed, and I love you, and I don't understand why you're not talking to me, why you're not here. It was something to that effect. And I got a response from you, and I was like, oh my gosh. And I go to open it thinking, like, you're going to say, I'm going to come. I'm going to be there for Mother's Day. And it was like, what? So you said I could share what you said? Okay.
Yeah, and I think in that time period when I finally sent you that, like, things were doing extremely well for me in that new little phase that I was going through. So it was almost like I was trying to validate myself in, like, see, you told me I couldn't make something out of this, and I am now. And I think that was a big driving force in finally saying something. Because when we talked about the messages, in the 3 years, there was only 2 times that I responded to you, and it was that one, and then one other time when it was my birthday, I randomly caught me on a good day.
Yeah. So yeah, I went into this long text with you, but the last thing I said, I know I won't see you on Mother's Day. A piece of my heart will be missing. I'm thinking of you, wishing you'd come back to us. We all miss you. And then you said, when you can accept me for me and stop judging me constantly for what I choose to do, then maybe one day we can have a relationship again. I talk to Nikki almost every day because she doesn't judge me. Stop pressing me on God 24/7. Let me be my own person, and let me make my own religious beliefs and decisions. Stop talking down to me because I like to smoke weed. I don't drink like the girls do, yet I hear it all the time. And you sending me BS, I don't care about.
I was like, is she going to say the cuss word?
No, I don't care about. Let me live my life. As sad as this makes me to say, ever since I stopped having you in my life, I'm finally happy and not wanting to kill myself every day. I'm at peace, and I'm getting back to my life in order again financially. I'll never forget you telling me to stop making funny videos or you'll stop supporting me. The one thing at this time brought me joy and peace. Now guess what? I'm using those funny videos to make me money and my OnlyFans so I can survive and pay. I would be dead if I didn't have OnlyFans right now. Not once have you ever asked what makes me happy. All you continue to do is tell me you love me 1 minute and then the next minute you're talking down to me. Happy, have a good Mother's Day. And so, yeah, I'm like, that was not what I expected. But like I told you, it was, I could have responded with all the reasons that you shouldn't be saying that to me. And how could you say that to me? And in that moment, I knew you were hurting. I knew that that was not you. That was the hurt. And so I just wanted you to know that I'm feeling for you. So I said my intent was never to hurt you. I have always been a mom who just wants to help you. I love you. And I put a heart. And then, all the texts and you didn't respond after that. But we were talking and I was sharing that, I really feel it's important when someone comes to you with something that hurts them, that you acknowledge their feelings. So that's what I wanted to do. And I always wanted to exude that, love of God for you and that you would feel that. And so, or also that I had changed, that I wasn't, hounding you on things. I wasn't pressing you on things, that I just genuinely, was here for you and sorry that, you're feeling the way that you do. So that was not what I expected on Mother's Day or the day before Mother's Day. But I did understand that you were in a bad place and you had to walk this out with God. And so, yeah, it was just interesting to just, as we're playing everything back and we're talking of just where we were, to what God has been able to do for us, right now. And so anyway, that was kind of crazy.
And I think, again, for me in those time periods too, I think, when I reflect on, all of it as a whole and like ask myself, like, where did I gain from it and my growth and all that is, I think that when times were getting tough too, for me, I could always lean on you for stuff, whether it was financially or just whatever. And so I think not having you, it made me have to deal with that on my own. And that's huge for me because I felt like, we talk about too with the girls, you're there for us with a lot of things, right? Sometimes maybe the girls more than me in aspects, but, I felt like the disconnect was when things really did get tough, I didn't have anyone to fall back on. And I'm more appreciative of it now because now I know when my back's against the wall, I don't have that out to just run to you for something and you be able to, be my escape essentially. I had to be like a grown man and figure it out myself.
Yeah. And what I do want to say, because I have done a lot for all of you kids emotionally, physically, financially, all of that. But what I do want to honor you in is at the time of your life before a lot of the things, came crashing on you and you were literally a millionaire. You had said to me, do you need anything, Mom? Because that was a time that I was going through my divorce and money was really tight for me. And, I call it pride or whatever, I would have never taken from you. But I just remember you saying, do you need anything? And I said, no, but if I do, I'll let you know. And just knowing that I had that, if I ever did need you, that you were there for me. So I do want to honor you in that you, when things were going really great for you, and you always were very generous, with your money. So, I just want you to know that it's like, it wasn't always us doing for you. You did a lot in that, back then. So, it's just what family does. It's like when people are doing well, you help. And when people are, hurting or they're in a good place, they can help you when you're hurting.
Yeah, I think, in that time period too, I would have conversations with Nikki, about like, what is life looking like between you guys? Are you guys still arguing? Is there still, because that was a big hang up, right? Is, outside of this thing that distanced us per se, I think a lot of it too was the exhaustion of, again, you were going through what I don't know if you remember this, but there was a time period where I said to you one time, I said, have you ever thought to yourself that maybe you are the one that has issues? And you like were beside yourself. You literally were like, I can't believe you would speak to me that way. Like maybe you have trauma that you need to deal with. And I remember I said that to you, and it was just like I don't know, like I just said you said something so insane to you that response, but it just reminds me like you were hurting in that sense to like have someone call you out for it, you know? And
Right.
so I think, you know, if we go to the present day and how much you've grown and the conversations we've had about the things that you've improved on, that reflective moment to me was like, so you did go and work on those things that I had said, but coming from your son or your kid, it was like not something that you.
I don't even think back then that I even could compute that. Like I was like, there's no way. Because the way that I viewed myself, I was so strong. I was so confident. I, had it all together being a single mom and, being able to handle everything. So why would I ever think that I had any trauma, any issues that I needed to work on? It was more of a disrespect that you would even say that to me when it's like, look what I've accomplished. And, but looking back and where I'm at now, it was a protection that I had, and I had to do that. I mean, I had to work for everything, and there were always new. I with you, I was a single mom, and I had to work really hard to make ends meet for us, and then going through a divorce and having to do it all over again by myself. And back then it was like I was training to compete. I was working 2 jobs, like I was meal prepping. I was doing it all. So it was like, why would I ever think that I have any issues? I mean, I've got it together. I'm balancing all this stuff. I used to look at other people and think, what do you mean you can't do it? Like, look at me. And so I would have never even put it together that I had any issues. But when it was all uncovered was when I walked it out with God. I was able to, through other friends, go through my past and my childhood and just really, I told my story. And as I was walking it out, I knew exactly when the trauma started. And it was, at 12 years old. And so it's like at that point, I knew why I was completely protective. It was what I went through as a child, And so, from then on, I went into complete protection mode in everything that I did, but I called it confidence and strength, and it was masked as, this protection. And there's so many people that do that, that there's a wall of protection. And so most people don't see you for who you are. They see that wall first. And until God, comes into your life and you heal and you crash that wall, people will continue to see that wall up. And so afterwards, when I had fully healed, is when people started seeing me for who I really am and the softness about me. And, there was still the confidence, there was still the strength, but it was exuding the love of Christ, and it was softer, it was different. And, and that's the light that Christians talk about. It's like, we're supposed to shine that light onto others. Well, when does it shine? It shines when you are actually living, with Christ, building that relationship, reading your Bible, going to church, all the things, and having community of other believers around you. So that's when everything shifted for me. And, one by one, Nikki, Tori, Deshaun, Michael, all of them, started following after. I wouldn't say that it was what I, did in my life. It was more about me leading, and then Tori, was going to, and so on. All of them came. And they all have, they all have their own journey, even you do, of how you came to it. It wasn't through me pushing you guys to go. It was just me leading by example, and just what the presence that I carried, meant everything. So I think that's where, I would have never, when you said that, but what's interesting is you had the discernment to know that about me. And, but I just wasn't willing to accept it at that point, And honestly, I don't even remember you telling me that. That's how much it just went over my head. And it was like, that's not me.
Yeah, because I think, it was pretty consensus between me and the girls that every time we would get into a gathering, it was like, when is mom going to get upset? And as soon as she got upset, the entire time it was ruined. And obviously at that time period, I was living in Vegas. So every time I came out here, it was few and far between because I didn't live here. So it got to a point where it was taxing of like, every time I'm going out there for a special occasion, there's going to be an argument. And if you were going through something in life, whether it was like who you were dating at the time or whatever, and that caused an issue, then we all all had the burden of feeling that issue too, because you were just expressing it, and then we would tick you off, or again, I'd smoke weed and that would be enough to you smell it, oh my god, your day's ruined. So I think that was another thing that was influencing me on top of the other stuff that we were dealing with, to want to stay away. I mean, it was definitely one of the hardest decisions I had to make, because I mean, obviously you're my best friend, so, and even with Tori, I mean, to cut her off too, I mean, me and her grew up and we've never fought in our entire life. I mean, she was just as close to me too. So I think those were two people that were significantly cut out of my life. But I just felt like in those moments, like, it felt toxic in the sense of like, it just was always an argument. There was always an issue that as hard as it was to disconnect, I felt, and we've talked about it in the first one, it was so appropriate, because I feel like we all needed to grow in our own way. And so like, to come back now, it's so refreshing to know that like, we're like all new people. We've grown in our own ways. We got to do it. Obviously it's unfortunate how it had to happen and the distance that was created. I mean, even for, me and Nikki, we didn't have a great relationship growing up, and, she was always the outcast in that aspect. And she was the one that I stayed connected to, and we grew exponentially. So it's like, it's weird how everything kind of worked out, and, we weren't talking, but I was close to Nikki, and my relationship with her grew in a way that it's never grown. And, I would check in with her to see how things were. She'd ask me the same. And, I always would say like, how's things going when you do family events? Are you guys still arguing? Is there still, and she would be like, no, it's a little bit better, or it's the same, or, it would be kind of like hit or miss as far as that goes. But I knew eventually at some point we would get to rekindling. That was my thought process. But then as the years kept going, my dad's not in my life. So I was like, I'm fine without my dad. I'm fine without my mom. Like, maybe I don't need anyone, and maybe Tori or Nikki will only be my little source of connection. And, I spent all those holidays alone, and, I would see Nikki post and see you guys, but it for some reason in those moments, it didn't bother me. There was never a time, I can honest to God say, there was never a time where I saw something and I felt like I was left out, or I felt like even when Deshaun came into the picture and I started seeing him, it didn't bother me. And I don't know if I just got comfortable with the idea that I've been doing this alone, and I've done it with my other parent not being in my life. So if I did it with him, I could do it with you too. And, just like anything else, the longer you go without seeing or doing something, it becomes easy to stay away from it. Like you miss time in the gym. Doesn't matter how dedicated you are to the gym. You miss a month, it's hard to get back into the gym.
Yeah. Well, so, I think it's a gift that God gives you. Because I feel the same way about like things that I've gone through in my life. Like, how did I get through this? Like, and looking at my childhood and all the things, and it's because that's the way God created me to be. And it also is for the time that it is now. Like, what I'm stepping into with God, it requires a lot of like a certain characteristic, and the strength. And I think the same is going to happen to you, that the things that you step into, only you could handle them. And that's why God's appointing you for them, because we do carry that strength, where it's like that strength was protecting us when we were, hurting and not healed. But once we healed, that strength, it now starts honoring God, and we start doing the hard things for God that maybe other people can't do, standing up for someone or speaking out or talking about God on a podcast. A lot of people won't be able to do that. It's like, we have the strength where we're just like, hey, we don't care. It's like, you could either like it or not like it. You don't have to follow us, but we're going to represent. So, that's why even when we're talking, I'll always circle it back around to God, because he does get the honor and the glory for this, because there's no way that I would have been able to do this on my own without, the relationship that I have with him. So, I always want, it sounds like it's just, I'm like, like leaning on God for everything. Oh, it was just God. But it really is, because that's what I want people to understand, that it's like, you cannot do it in your own strength, in your own will. You won't. And that's the thing with us, with the dynamics that were going on. We would have kept fighting. We would have kept, being close, but it wouldn't have been as good as it is now, because we weren't having God as the center of our lives. So it's like, that's what families do. It's like they just continue fighting. Nobody heals. Nobody wants to listen to each other. Just like what you were telling me, I didn't hear it. How many, family members, when they're fighting, they're just wanting to get their point across, but they're not listening,
Correct.
And so it's like, I didn't hear it, and so the only reason why now we can, step into things and get along and honor each other and help each other out is because of the fact that God is at the center. I could say something to Nikki, Tori, you, and it's like, yeah, okay, they don't want to receive that. And I just back down and I don't say anything. Where before it would bother me.
You're going to hear me and you're going to listen.
Yeah, and it would really bother me. And I just know that it's just like, that's my discernment to know you're not ready to receive what I want to say. Not right now, maybe in a week, a month, or whatever. And it's okay. I'm fine with it. I'm at peace with it. Where before it was like, oh no, you're going to listen to what I have to say. And that was never landing right. And that's not the way, it's supposed to be. But if you are centered with Christ, you're going to always have that peace to where you know when to speak, when to not. Sometimes you still get it wrong, but for the most part, you are more composed because you have that peace.
So, after kind of explaining all that stuff, I think that, there was very few encounters that aside from the wedding that we kind of dabbled into with the first one, there was only one other encounter that we almost had. Because there was obviously even minimal text messages. I remember, during that time period, I would go make some, every so often visits to see Logan and to see Austin. Obviously, at some period, Austin wasn't even born yet. And so there was the one time where I had scheduled Nikki, hey, I'm going to come down, come hang out with you guys for the day and then fly back or whatever. So, I remember showing up and, I don't know what she said to me. Like, I just got there and she's like, oh, mom's on the way. And I was like, mom's on the way? What do you mean mom's on the way? She says, yeah, I told you mom's on the way. And I was like, you never told me that mom was coming here. I was like, no, that's not happening. She's like, what do you mean? I was like, they're not coming here. I don't want them here. And I don't know what she said to you. You could probably, elaborate more on like that situation, on like the emotions from that side, of what she said to you. But again, all she said to me was that you guys were, I think she said like, yeah, they're outside. I was like, they're outside.
Yeah. And so she texted me and she said, Mom, I'm so sorry. She's like, Devin had no idea that you were coming and he doesn't want you guys coming in. And I remember just like my stomach just hurting and just went, ugh. And then I looked over at Tori and she was like shocked. And then I said, okay, we'll leave. And then Tori's like, no. And she started getting teary-eyed and I'm like, it's okay. And then Nikki was like, no. Let me talk to him. And I go, no, Nikki, it's okay. She goes, no, just hold on. Give me a few minutes. And so she, talked with you. She came back. And she came out actually to the car and she said, he'll, he was like, okay, I'll see you guys, but he had a couple questions for you. And so just the way she said it, I went, you know what, Nikki, when she went inside to talk to you, I was praying. And I remember in the prayer praying that God had said, this is not how you guys are going to meet. Today's not the day. And I knew that for sure, the way he was telling me. And so when she came out, I said, and then she asked those questions, I said, no, it's okay. We're going to leave. And I want you to just go in there and tell him that we're going to leave and for you to have a good time, for him to have, you and him to have a good time together. And she's like, no, are you sure? And I'm like, yeah, it's fine. Trust me. I go, just tell him that. And then she told me that you were like, wow, that was cool of Mom. And so we drove off and I told Tori, I said, the devil wanted me to go in there and you and I were going to get into it. Like it was not going to be a good meeting. And
I wasn't ready to receive it either. So there's no, like, I don't remember the context. Like Nikki could have said certain things to try to bring us together.
Yeah.
But I do remember in that time period, I was not on board to have any type of conversation.
Yeah. So
because I still think there was a bit of anger towards, even with Tori, because she, that's the interesting story with her too, is like, I felt betrayed by her because we didn't have a problem, like she just was, I don't know how she got kind of thrown in there. So, there was times where I had a lot of anger towards her because I'm like, I didn't do anything to you. And this is a separation. So I know for a fact that I was not in a position to receive you guys whatsoever. So it would have 100% been
I think it was just because she lived with me.
And it was just like,
yeah. And then I know she was really disappointed in the way that you were, representing yourself. Mm-hmm. So she had unfollowed you. She's like, I don't want to.
Yeah, that was one thing that like got me too.
Hurt you.
Was that.
And so I told her, I said, I'm not going to unfollow. It's like, I just can't do that but she was just like, I don't want anyone thinking that I'm okay with what he's doing. And so I respected how she felt, and I knew that it would hurt you, but I'm like, well, there's not anything we could do. So, so then we left, we drove off, and I remember Tori cried the whole way. And I said, it's okay, honey. I go, I promise you, we're going to have a great meeting, but this is not the day that it's going to happen. And it was hard because, she had missed you so much. And, we drove, and it was like almost an hour to get there. And I think for her, she was just like probably pondering the thoughts of like how, I get to see him finally. And so I have to turn around and go. But, I knew, and this is, the journey that you take when you get close to God. It's like you hear his voice, and when you're supposed to move and when you're not supposed to move. And it was crystal clear that I was not supposed to go in there. And, and I didn't go off of what I wanted to do. I went off of what God wanted me to do. And so, yeah, we left, and, that was it. And so that was literally the last time we talked to you, or that we even got that close to even potentially seeing you. And then it went on from there. I mean, I want to say maybe another year of us not talking to you, maybe less, I'm not sure. But, then it wasn't until, like we already talked about, where the wedding was coming up, and,
there was a long period of time where you would text me and I wouldn't even read them. Like I can honestly say, out of all the messages you sent, there was probably 90% of them I didn't even read.
Wow.
It would just come in, and I would just click it just so that it wasn't an unread message anymore, and I would move on, because I knew it was repetitive. It was a similar thing. And I had zero desires. I was fixated on where my path was leading me. And, we talked about this too. Like, it was an exciting path for me because it was finally not the fitness part where I felt like I was beating a dead horse over it, because I just could never gain momentum the way I wanted to. And I was going into a new venture that was exciting. It was fun. It was different. It was bringing life to me, whether it was, at the time I knew it was the darkness or not, it felt like the light to me.
Yeah.
And so I was just I think you said in the first one, like, I didn't want to hear it from you. So it was pushing you away, because I knew that bringing you in, I was going to have to hear it.
Right.
And have to hear.
Well, that's what was crazy is I wish I would have wrote it down, because I told you and you looked at me like, wow, that was exactly what I was thinking. Is I knew, and that God gave me like 100% that whole like download of how it was, what was going on. And it was basically, you were in that place, and you did not want anything to do with us, because if we were in your life, you felt we were going to tell you, what are you doing and why are you doing that? And so you for sure wanted to be separated from us. So I knew that when we would get back together would be when you were in the right place to be able to have us in there. And I thought it could look like where he's just doing really well for himself, and he's just like, okay, cool. I'm going to be unfazed by whatever they're telling me, because I've got a groove and it's all good. But then there was a point where I was just like, no, I'm going to start praying, because I know my son, and he will not, if he has things going for him, he will not come home. He will not come back to us. So I started praying hard. God, take everything from him. Take everything. And that was a hard prayer to pray, because, I don't want you hurt. I don't want you going through that. But I knew, because I had went through that the only way that you actually surrender to God and give everything to God is when you have nothing left. It's like, okay, it's just the way we're designed, that we will cry out to him. And so I knew that that's what you would do. And so, I already said, I know how it's all going to play out. And when he has finally either hit rock bottom, or he's just ready to, because he's in a better position for himself, then he'll come forward and he'll accept us, And so that's why I had mentioned the waiting was just the hardest part, because I didn't know when, but I knew you were coming home, and my prayers covered you 100% with, what God was going to do for you. And so it was just a matter of time. But so that was what was just the whole journey of it all, is you being covered in prayer, you having to walk it out, and us just knowing that it's like, okay.
Yeah. And I think outside of not wanting to hear it in the beginning phase, I also knew the deeper I was getting into the workspace that I was doing, and how much you were, dove your into Christ and all into it, like all those different things, I knew that wouldn't be accepted. So I think I knew for as long as me being in that space, even if I came around, what would that look like? I think there was times where I would say to Nikki, like, would she even be proud to post me? Like, because then if she tags me and they go on my page, they're going to see everything that I'm doing, and it's not a representation of Christ at all.
And that was the interesting part is, you didn't know any of this, but I had already knew what was going to happen. And I said, if he comes home and, I want you to know you're loved no matter what. So if, I post you and somebody goes to click, I knew my circle, there's no one that is going to think bad of you. If anything, they're going to pray into that, for you. And so I knew that it's like I had the right people around me, that they would never talk behind your back. They would actually be praying for you. And, and then also too, like, I don't have the kind of friends that are going to go, who are you? And go stalking, looking at, who you are. And so it was like, that was never a worry for me at all. And, and again, you are a child of God. And so it's just like, it's not my job to, put that on you of like what you're doing wrong. God's going to walk you through that. And, the closer you got to him, you would feel the conviction. So I didn't have to do anything, and that's what's sad. It's like, I wanted so badly for you to know where I was in my life and my walk, but you weren't anywhere near me. And of course, that was the enemy's design. It's like, I don't want you two ever connecting, because look at us. Look at us when we reconciled, what we're going to do together. The enemy never wanted this, because our story is going to help so many people. And that's the last thing he wanted, And so it's like, and I knew, and it was interesting because I'll say really quick, I remember a time when I was struggling with just like things that I was creating with, my business with my hair perfume. And it was literally 2 days before you had voice memoed me. And Tyler had said, what can I do for you? How can I support you? And for the first time, I don't know why I popped off and said, and I go, I need Devin. And it wasn't because I needed you emotionally. I needed your expertise. I needed your marketing, wisdom, and just the way that you always motivated me. And I'm like, that's what I need in my life right now. And he goes, well, call him up. And I'm like, no, he's ignored every text. I'm like, he's not going to respond to me. And how ironic. It was almost like God wanted me to say it out loud, what I needed, because 2 days later you send me that audio message, and then here we are, so it was literally like, it was just crazy the way it all kind of took place. For me, the whole thing was extremely spiritual. Like God's hand was on every detail and every moment. He had designed it all, and that's the thing that's so beautiful, is that he will do it right and perfect in the right timing. But we always get it wrong because we want to push things,
Like
faster.
Force it.
Yeah. And it was just like, that's what was just so crazy.
Yeah, because there was a lot of instances where me and Nikki would talk about meeting. I mean, we had a lot of conversations about like, you ready to have a conversation? You ready to have a conversation? Like, we talked about it so many times, and it just never formulated to an actual thing. Like, when can you come out here? And I was like, okay, well, is she good with this? Can she do this? And then we would stop talking about it. And then months would go on, and then she'd ask me again. And I'm like, no, I'm not ready, or whatever. Life would be going on for me. No, I'm not ready. But when you were doing the prayers of like, not wishing the negative on me, there would be times where I would be killing it, and then I'd get the rug pulled from underneath me, and I'm like, wow, I can't catch a break, and again, that's why I'm saying, like, one thing I've realized is growing is not a one-time thing. You're constantly having to grow, right? It's like, working on yourself never ends. 1 minute you're good, and then the next minute, boom, you're working on yourself again. I always give the analogy. It's like looking both ways when you cross the street and then getting hit by an airplane.
Yeah.
It's like you have to realize that when you grow once, that's not a one-time thing. You're going to have to keep doing it over and over and over again. So that's why in those periods, like I went through the ringer with things. I seen a lot of things. I experienced a lot of things, but and so much solitude because I'm so what's the word? Like a strong individual. I sat in solitude and I did something with it. I didn't sit there and pout. I didn't sit there and cry. Even in the times where I felt I was my lowest, and when I had this conversation with Mark too, when we sat down, which I'll elaborate a little bit more, I never once went to God for anything. when it was in my lowest, when I was in my highest, you know, how people when they're at their lowest, they pray to God, please help me. I never did that, you know, and maybe it just didn't feel genuine for me to go there when I never was putting my beliefs in him and ever. So that was never a thought process. I just knew that I had to figure it out for myself, and, just kind of going through those motions. And then obviously the randomness of hearing that, seeing Nick, and then there was another time too where Tori got engaged, and I was invited to the proposal, and I'm like, I'm not going to go. Like, and that was easy for me to not go to, because I'm like, what happens when you're preoccupied, Nikki? Like, who's going to hang out with me? I'm like, that's going to be the most awkward setting. I'm like, your dad's going to be there. I can't stand him. Like, like, I don't want to be, there's nowhere I could turn. So like, I missed that, but then I knew, okay, well, she got engaged. So the next phase is obviously going to be the wedding. And so, and Tori would message me every once in a while. I think we had some small conversations here and there throughout the years, maybe a little bit more with her, but she didn't reach out nearly as much as you did. And then again, just the leading up stages of the wedding. I mean, when she first asked me, I was like, no, I'm not going. Like there was not an ounce in me that thought I was. And then as it got closer and closer and closer, and then I, kind of sat with it more, then I finally just, I remember pulling up to the wedding, and I just was like, fuck, what's going to go on here? Like, what is going to happen here? Like this is 3 years, like I haven't seen any of these people in 3 years. And I knew like Hannah was going to be there, Claire was going to be there, all these people that I've watched them grow up as kids. And I was just like, what's this going to, it's so awkward. Luckily at the time I had Savannah with me, like my girlfriend at the time. So I wasn't alone, because even in those moments, like it was either initially when I had thought maybe about going, it was my co-host was going to go with me. So I wasn't alone, because I know for a fact that if I didn't have somebody with me, I wouldn't have went, because it would have been too awkward for me. And I needed to have those moments of like when things were silenced, and obviously Tori's having her special day. There's going to be times where I was alone.
Yeah.
And so, thankfully I had her to go with me. And, again, when I walked in, it was like everyone knew me, and I knew they knew me, I just didn't know them, so I think that was, everyone embraced me and, was like, oh, nice to meet you. And everyone was just happy and go lucky. And so obviously that whole process was a lot easier for me. And then again, there was definitely a lot of awkward times where we were in the room by ourselves sometimes, and I'm like, oh, this is awkward, but after the wedding, I felt good that I was there. I was emotional when she was getting, married, doing the dancing and, all those types of things. I definitely felt a tremendous amount of emotion for her, because she's my best friend, and so obviously I spent a lot of years not having somebody as close as her as I had.
Right.
And so, once the dust was settled there and I went back home, I remember I did a podcast like the next week, and we talked about it a little bit. And I remember you had texted me, and I couldn't get myself to text you again. It was like almost like I went back to that autopilot.
Yeah.
Of just I wasn't ready. And
I had a process that you were talking to Tori, and I didn't know, and it was just me you weren't talking to, because I'd send you messages, and I was like, oh gosh, we're back to not talking. And I had a process, and I was like, okay, God, I'm gonna be okay with this, that you all would talk, Nikki, Tori, and you were gonna leave me out. And this is where Tori's living, at the beach. And I'm like, oh, they're just gonna all hang out there now, because she doesn't live here with me, so they're just gonna go over there. And I had to be ready for that.
And I talked to her, but it still was loose. Like she had asked me to come back out because she was going to be going to spring training, and I still was on the fence about that. I don't think that if I didn't call you, I wouldn't have came out. Like I wouldn't have came out just to see her for spring training, like before she left. The wedding was enough for me. So we weren't having extensive conversations after that. There still was the awkwardness. Mm-hmm. I didn't respond back in a timely manner to her. But I remember when you messaged me, and I even said to Savannah, I'm like, it just doesn't feel right. She's like, you got to respond. I'm like, no. I'm like, and one thing about me in the 3 years is I was living my truth. And I felt that if I responded to you, I was being fake. And that was something that I was trying to stay true to myself, is like, whether it hurts someone's feelings or not, I'd rather be honest, because even in those time periods of us being apart too, I was going to therapy too. I know I started going to therapy when we were in the tail end of us cutting off, but I still was going consistently. And then that's where I, was able to dive deep into my traumas and figuring out why I was the way that I was, and, lying being such a huge thing. And so I wanted to always, stay true to myself and all the work that I was putting in, and texting you just to say love you, or great time that would have been unauthentic, and it reminded me of all the times that I lied for things that weren't authentic just to solve the issue or respond to somebody. And there wasn't an ounce of me that felt guilty because there's nothing that had nothing to say. And again, it wasn't until, I got into a place where I felt like I was at my really lowest that it just came over me, and again, I wasn't praying to God about it. It just came over me for the first time. I was like, I need to call my mom. I don't know why. I don't even know what came over me that there was this need to do it.
And what's interesting is you went from like, I don't even know what to say to her to, I mean, your audio was very heartfelt and it was just everything that you were feeling. So
but it goes back to the wedding aspect too, of not feeling pressed. I wasn't caught up in not responding to you. I was more invested in the idea that when I was there, I was able to just enjoy Tori's moment there. I wasn't being, in a normal situation, you would have came up to me, and I thought that like, you're going to come up to me, we're going to argue, you're going to ask me all these things, and you did none of those things. So again, those are all huge things that even in the moment afterwards that I didn't respond, it still set with me of like, I can acknowledge the fact that she treated me a different way. I don't need to respond right now because it's not genuine, but it's that planted the seed of the reconnection. If you didn't treat me that way at the wedding, it would have just continued to go, south in the different direction. So obviously, we talked about in the first episode, I come out here and, I think who you surround yourself with is huge, right? And so part of being in Vegas, I was in solitude outside of, working with people here and there. Outside of that, I was alone 24/7. I mean, I would go to the gym and I'd come home. It'd be me and my dogs, and that's it. I spent 90% of my time inside that apartment, the one that you came to. So, just being in those environments of solitude, it just never made me feel that I needed to branch out anymore. I was
didn't know what you were missing.
No, I was just totally in this little bubble, and that was it. So, when I came out here, being around people, the welcomingness, I mean, going to the church and going on my own terms. And, again, I talked about like growing up and feeling like it was a chore and, all those things. It was like, I'm making these conscious decisions on my own just to try, and if I didn't like it, I knew you weren't going to tell me I had to go. And then, being out here more. And then, shortly after, you said, Mark prophesied over me and, said that beautiful prayer. And, it was so heartfelt and deep because it was like, he was talking to me and he didn't even know me. The things he was saying were, I mean, I was crying when I was sitting in the church. I was trying to hold it back, because I didn't have my glasses on.
We were all bawling.
Yeah, it was
all of us.
I was not expecting that to be something that was just thrown out there like that. And then, a couple weeks after, he follows me, and then I get a DM from him, and he's like, "Hey, man, I would love to, catch up with you." Because at Tori's wedding, I met him, but it was very brief because obviously he married them, right?
Right.
And so he's like, "I'd love to catch up with you." And again, because everything was just on my terms, I just felt the, desire to, all right, let's do a meeting and kind of go from there. So I went to the church, and I remember he's like, "You want to, get food or anything?" And I was like, I'm really strict on my diet, but the only thing that gives me flexibility is, In-N-Out. I have it every single day. He's like, "Done. We'll get In-N-Out." So I told him my order, and he's like, "Do you want to go somewhere to eat?" And I was like, "Why don't we just meet at the church?" He's like, "All right, cool. I'm cool with that." So he gave me a little tour, walked into the little, I don't know if that was his office specifically, but almost like a big area with like a table and everything. And the In-N-Out was waiting for us. Got my 4x4 just waiting. And, we just dove into it, and I didn't hold anything back. When I sat down, again, I'm living my truth. So when I talk to people, I'm not afraid to say what I've been through or talk about things because I feel like people relate to me more when I'm being authentic, and no one's going to judge me for coming out the gates and not hesitating. And so, I told them everything from start to finish. Talked about the shreds days. Obviously I gave a shorter version of things, but I went from, cause he had asked a, social media thing, and I kind of just dropped a bomb on him, and I just kind of told him everything from start to finish. And, he told me some things about him that probably most people don't know. And, we had this authentic conversation as if I'd known this guy for 10 years. And we just went back and forth. We had a 3-hour conversation. It's like I, at one point, didn't even finish my burger because I was so invested, in the conversation that we were having. And it was nice too, because there was such a disconnect through the church that we went to, Calvary. Like, where I just went there. I sat there. I was like a zombie and I couldn't wait till the time was out. You know, it was like trying to not to fall asleep every single, time we were there. And so to have, go to a church that I felt was more lively, a pastor that I felt I could relate to, and then he wants to sit down and have a conversation with me. That conversation was so big because it broke that ice of like a pastor and now he's a friend. And so when I go to church now, it's like I've had conversations with him so I can feel even more connected. So, by the end of it, he said, that was one of the main things he said. He's like, do you feel like, you want to give your life to Christ? You want to go all in? He's like, whenever you feel you're ready, just let me know. And I was like, let's do it now. And so he prayed over me. And, that's when I had said to him, like, you have to do things perfect. And he said no. And, it was just an overall great, thing. I left feeling, even more replenished. And, that's why I said it's so huge who you surround yourself with. And I think as I've gotten older, one thing I've realized is I've gotten so selective about who I give my time and my energy to. And so that was a huge thing for me, is like, when I'm coming back here, I want to be around family because that's what matters the most. And then to complement that, the people that you have around you, they're in that same type of environment where it's just empowering you and you feel good and, all the different things. So it just made me lean into it even more.
So well said.
Yeah.
Really well. Yeah. I mean, that's it right there. It's, people don't surround themselves with the right people. And, with Christianity, it's like, there's such a bad stigma to it where it's like Christians sometimes don't represent, the love of Christ. It's like they're 1 foot in and 1 foot out. And I think that the circle that we're around, it's like, we're all in, and you felt that and you knew that. And it's like, you wanted to be a part of that. And it wasn't something that was bad. It's like, no, this is what's good, is when you go all in. It's when you're, lukewarm, and, it's like, that's when it's not good. That's when it's like, you're a hypocrite and people look at you and you're like, I don't want to be a Christian if that's what you do. So I think for you, it's like, you saw this environment of people, that just really were exuding the love of Jesus. I mean, you felt that, and that's what we're supposed to do. So I think it was just really cool. And, for you just right then and there, accept Christ and just say, okay, I'm living for God now. And then here we are.
And again, it's the principle of not knowing what you were missing out on, right? And when you get so comfortable in the solitude and who you're around, the negativity, you don't realize like life could be better outside of that. So, it's been a crazy last couple months for me, and I've just kind of fully embraced it with, cutting out the weed, not doing drugs at all, like even the occasional ones that I would do outside of weed. And, it's like, I just feel so, I'm getting bombarded with messages of people like, yo, I love to see this new side of you. And, it's awesome. You're an amazing person, blah, blah, blah. So, everything's coming full circle. And the most important thing is I'm back with my family, back with you, and being able to, rekindle what we had such a great relationship with, and, all the different things. So, I think one of the big things we talked about too is a lot of people know our relationship prior to the estranged 3 years. And so I know in the next episode, we want to kind of talk about like, we obviously had a good relationship throughout our, my growing up and stuff like that, but where did it really change where we got super close? And so what we're going to do is the next episode that we jump into next week, we're kind of going to elaborate where that started. What were some things that I said to you that got you to be motivated into the fitness industry, which essentially got us extremely close. Once again, thank you guys so much for, taking this journey with us. We're excited to continue to put episodes out week after week. We have some intense conversations that we're going to be bringing up over the next couple weeks. I think one of the main things was to bring us to the current events and explain everything so people were on board with understanding all the different things that were going on. So again, thank you guys for joining us. Until next week, make sure you follow my mom, Liz Webster Official. I'm Devin Physique. Make sure you follow our podcast at Tell No Lies Podcast. And then you can also find us on YouTube, youtube.com at the Tell No Lies Podcast. Until next week, guys, thanks for joining, and we'll see you soon. Peace.